Sec. There we go. We're live. Welcome to the show, Taru.
Thanks for invite. Good to be here.
Absolutely. Before we started the recording, you were telling me about a little bit about your journey. I want to, have you on the show because I think you've got like one of the most interesting stories. Growing up in Japan, going to uni in U.S., and then like backpacking around the world. Like, let's start from the beginning. How did you like? What were you like, early on? And let's like tell us about your journey.
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up in Japan up until high school. And then for undergraduate, I did go to school in US. And just like so many, well, it was 1990s. And at the time, most people wanted to be either consultants or investment bankers. And I chose, just like so many others were pursuing, I decided to go to investment banking, one of the Wall Street banks. I was working in Tokyo for this bank as a banker for a couple of years, but it was yeah, it was a experience. I'm glad I did it, but it was not something I was enjoying full time. Therefore, I didn't know what else I wanted to do. Therefore, I decided to do backpacking. Just wanted to uh, not to fly. I wanted to take a train or bus or boat as much as possible, and then decided to go west, basically from Japan. I think in total I visited maybe 20 plus countries, um, Asia, Africa, Europe, and then North America. Spent the year just wandering around what to do. Then one of the one of the visits to countries in, I think it was in Cambodia, I got a little ill. I got sick, and then I think just by combination of being, in a foreign country, getting sick, um, and I think made me realize that the life is could be short, and then also, I also remember that when I was small, in 8, 9 years old, I used to love nature's trees and, being outdoor. Then, so I decided, okay, I want to pursue something related to environmental issues. So that's where I decided to return to Japan. Then at the time, I was thinking about, okay, maybe I'll go to grad school studying environmental science or some related field. But then um, one of my bosses that I was working for at a bank previously, he called me up and he had his own boutique company investing in startups. And he was like, well, why don't you join me and then, help me to build this company? So that was a bioplastic startup, Tokyo-based, but then they had operations in Australia, trying to, yeah, work with farmers in Australia. It was an interesting experience in its own. Um, but then I realized that I really didn't know much about business. Even though a lot of people coming from finance, they tend to think, oh, we know finance, we know everything. And I had a similar arrogant attitude, but then quickly I found out it was not the case. So I decided to go back to school, study. Um, but then, yeah, so I did, but I just didn't want to do any study. Well, given that I wanted to focus on environmental issues and given my some background in finance, I decided to find areas that I can see could be a emphasis of that space. I did go to a school in Netherlands, doing some business studies. It was at a time when the so-called uh, carbon market, first wave of carbon market was starting to emerge. In Europe, they started trading carbon credits in 2005, and then Kyoto Protocol started in 2008. But around that time, I joined a bank in Netherlands trading carbon credits. It's, for people who are not familiar with the trading or finance world, it might sound strange, but those days, banks also traded, all kinds of commodities, um, oil to electricity to and carbon credits. So that's where I was. Um, so carbon credits itself sort of died out, unfortunately, because it's both demand and supply are created by regulations and government agreements. I was, but then the bank I was also working for, so went under. It was during so-called Lehman Brothers financial crisis in 2008. I left there and joined a company in Abu Dhabi, and where again I was trying to work on the carbon market. Spent a couple years. That also a very good experience for me because I never lived in Middle East before. That was my first experience in a different culture. That was yeah, that was also quite fascinating. Afterwards, after a couple years, I thought, okay, maybe I want to go back to Japan. So I went back, started working for a company called Marubeni. It's a Japanese trading or investment company. Um, but given that the carbon market disappeared, um, I and a few other friends from Europe who used to also work in the carbon market, we decided to create joint venture rather than trading, buying, and selling this financial instrument called carbon credits. We decided to invest into assets. So we buy turbines and energy facilities from old, chemical plants and revamp them, replace them with a newer, more efficient machines, and provide them the companies with heat, electricity, and other forms of services. So that's what I did until 2016. And I also, at the time, I was like, after spending so many years working for large corporates, I thought maybe it's time for me to do something on my own. So a few of my friends and I, we said we want to pursue something for ourselves. Again, given my friends were more about traders, we thought we wanted to do energy trading in Europe. Um, Spent about a year and a half or so trying to raise capital. Was not easy at all. And so therefore I have a great respect to anybody who can start their own business and become their own boss. I greatly admire. And year and a half or so, I decided it was not working out for me and for us with my friends. Therefore, I just decided to switch to become a cheerleader of startups rather than being a startup myself. So that was 2017, and joined Energy Environment Investment, that a fund I work with, which is based in Tokyo. This fund itself has been investing in energy transition since 2006. And majority of investments the fund EEI does um, are mostly in Japan. But then they also look at the opportunistically European, North American investment opportunities in startups. And today I cover sourcing deals, vetting, well, initial screening, as well as once we make investments, I tend to follow them. And I split my time between California, where I have some of my family members, as well as Amsterdam in Netherlands, where I use my base, Amsterdam as my base to look around European opportunities. And then, yeah, occasionally go back to Japan. So it's a very long story, but that's how I came, and therefore energy. So I became a venture capitalist by accident or without much thought around. It was never a plan, so it just happened. I have been always looking looking at and interested in environmental issues. So I think that's where how it took me my interest to where I am today.
Absolutely. I mean, it's going from loving nature as a kid to now actually funding projects that, and startups that impact nature. That's quite, I mean, that's quite awesome. I think that's very cool. You mentioned splitting your time between California right now and Japan and Europe, and you've seen all three of the major continents, basically, and you've traveled to Africa as well, and you've been in the Middle East. I want to ask you about if you're especially a young founder today, or just a founder in general, and you want to build some kind of tech startup or even something in maybe energy and climate, and you're thinking about the different opportunities. Where would you go? Like if you're young Itaru and you're this time like you're determined, you're like, I'm gonna build a startup and I'm gonna succeed and I'm gonna make it work no matter what. Where would you position yourself? Would you be in a place like North America where like everyone wants to go, like San Francisco, New York, or where would you go?
Well, so yeah, I have a benefit sort of luxury, and I'm very fortunate that I get to see different well, to meet the different founders and different markets. Um, it's very different. Each market is different, and I think ultimately, if you have a choice, and if you have all the choices you want to have, I think especially well, given that I'm looking at the more climate space, therefore I can only speak for this climate related founders, not so much on AI and other like very hype popular space for the moment, but both Europe, including place like Berlin, some of the German cities, as well as of course US West Coast is all great places, and comes down to type of circle of friends you can find. I think it's makes both obviously as a founders, co-founders, if you can find a good source of good teammates, that's always a huge plus, as well as climate is often many companies are working on not just on software, but they need to somehow work with hardware or even a large project or plans. That means you need to have very in relatively close relationship with some industrial companies, for instance. So those are, depends on what you are pursuing and depends on what kind of ecosystem you can find and get yourself into, I think makes a difference. Um, so I wouldn't be able to pick one location to say, but whatever you're pursuing, find friends to work on and, find partners who can help you. I think and wherever you can find that place to be, it'd be a perfect spot for you. I think that's how I see it.
Yeah, would you say generally though, if you were to like pick a place, is do you think North America is more ideal, Europe, Asia? If like we're talking about just like how big the ecosystem is and how many opportunities there are to build relationships, you mentioned having to build that kind of connection with industrial companies. Which at least continent and maybe even country do you think is the best for that, or at least makes your job the easiest?
Um, yeah, so it's a difficult one to answer, but if you can find suitable support in Europe, especially for climate, because climate is also many products or companies' activities that are related to climate may be better to have somewhat stable government policies. So what that means is that you don't want to have a change in direction of policies every 4 years. In that respect, I think Europe might be better suited for the climate related. Having said that, of course, you current program that the U.S. government has, IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, is a huge boost to companies who can benefit from this support. So yeah, and U.S. has a lot more capital, So the valuation tends to be much higher, and I think things move faster than Europe or other parts of the world, maybe except China. I don't know. Yeah, so sorry, I cannot give you a single location, but that's how I see.
That's fine. I want to ask you, in a time where everybody's paying attention to the same set of industries, because almost every single young person, especially I talk to, maybe this is not the case for older founders, the ones in their 30s, 40s, etc., but a lot of the young people are paying attention to the same exact industries: AI, software, consumer products. But energy is probably one that's not going to go away. It's the most important for the world, and we all need it. We can't survive without it, and there are a lot of opportunities around it. As an investor, I'm sure you get to see. You mentioned now raising your fund too, and looking to deploy over, I believe you said $200 million across these industries. I'm sure you get exposure to a lot of different opportunities. If you're I want to divide a question to a couple of different pieces, but the first is, if you're somewhere around 18 and 25, do you think there's an opportunity for you to come in as an outsider and disrupt certain elements of the energy sector? Or do you think it's still the barrier to entry is just far too high for somebody young to really get in?
Well, um, so first of all, the answer is yes to anybody who are interested in getting in. As you say, energy is something we all need, and maybe the form and format may change, but it's all going to be, there will always be a demand for it. And it's a huge market. And it's also it's a market that's changing rapidly. So there's a lot of opportunities in many space, both technical, non-technical, business model play. There are always plenty of opportunities. Um, but I guess what's important to understand is that customer base, what market you are targeting, even within energy. For instance, if you're talking to energy or utility, either power, electricity market, and then certain regions, jurisdictions regulate. Well, most of the utilities sectors, globally speaking, they are regulated. So you have to understand what are the rules and how they work and what's legal, what's not legal, as well as even if you are as a third party private sector entity, even if you can get in, the utility sector is very slow. Making decisions, making moves are very slow. So and they are very conservative. Therefore, nobody wants to be number one trying new technology, new innovation. Everybody says, I want to be number one in be number two, more or less. That's what they say. So it's a tough market to crack. Therefore, it's a good question. So you want to really understand their customer base, who they're going to be. But within energy, you can talk about energy providing to vehicles, and as you can imagine, solar panels with battery, with charger, you can become a provider of electricity today. But then, if you are trying to sell something to utilities, it could be slightly different, and the time requires to achieve certain milestone might they may not understand the cash requirements of startup. No matter what, you're gonna be some expense. You're gonna have some expenses every month, and these utilities they tend to spend a few years making decisions or make plans over the next 5 to 10 years, and it's not next few months of activities that they have in their mind. So those are good points, good questions, and yeah, they need to be aware.
So you mentioned sales cycles are usually far longer. A lot of the massive utility companies that you would, traditionally be selling to, they're very slow to act, they're very conservative, very risk averse, certainly. And you mentioned also it's very capital intensive to get into the energy sector. If you're a young person looking in today, or even maybe in your 30s, and you're saying, I want to build something massive and I want to just make an entry into this market, I'm sure you know a lot more about the potential business models and the folks you could sell to and the different things you could do, ideas you could have. From the outside looking in, how could somebody break into the industry? Obviously, approaching funds like yours for the capital requirements is one, but what could they do to get in? What are some different, like, maybe lower barrier to entry points where they can just like go in and start, building something of value?
Yeah, um, that is also a very good question. I don't know if I have a answer to that, unfortunately. I do come across entrepreneurs who do come from completely different backgrounds, but let's say recently I met people coming from, telecom sector. Um, but then they are leveraging their experience in one way or another. And, telecom and utilities may not sound like they're overlapping, but they often do because both are network. And if you talk about digitizing the system, making things smart with AI, for instance, the telecom background helps. Um, I have not met too many people who have no knowledge on whatsoever in this market and then trying to establish something and reaching certain milestone. They may be those folks, but they always perhaps have co-founders or good colleagues that they help get the advice on, and they may focus on, let's say, IT interface, and that's what they focus on. But then, as a team, they have complementary skill sets that allows them to execute the plan and achieve milestones. Um, but anyway, if there's any specific question, I might be able to give a better answer. That's how I see it.
Hmm. Maybe like one part is, in recent years, the kind of security part of energy and utility companies has come up a lot, and there's been a lot of attacks on the electricity grid of the United States specifically, but also I think in Europe as well. There's a massive rise in attacks, and there's been a lot of cyber warfare. What about that? Like, that seems like something that you could, get into. Maybe through software and AI, you could find some kind of opportunities into. Maybe, you couldn't build these massive electrical facilities or sell products or services if you don't have the kind of relevant experience. But what about like the security end of things? I'd love to get your take on that and maybe opportunities and ideas over there that you might have.
That could be a very good area to explore, indeed. I was speaking to one founder recently, or maybe, yeah, relatively recently. He does cybersecurities for utility sectors, and but then they were telling me that there's also a well-known program, uh, accelerator program based in US, and they wanted to create energy sector slash cybersecurity, but then they couldn't get enough participants, so they decided to scrap it. But this is a segment, I think, if you have a background in background in that cybersecurity, either through experience or knowledge, there's definitely a huge demand for providing some, of course, protection, setting up guards, and being able to constantly monitor. So that is indeed, if you have people, friends working on it, I think that has a good potential entry, and that's probably an area we don't see enough of them.
Okay, awesome. I mean, I guess you could say that's a good entry point. I want to shift sort of the conversation to talking about trust, and particularly building trust with investors when you're sitting with them. Now, I know you focus on a very particular specific industry, but I'm sure there are a lot of, a lot of crossovers with just like the approach people should take to talking to investors. When you sit across from a founder, what makes you trust them? What makes you? I've heard a lot of investors say, I just look for the vibes. Like I want to feel like I like that person. I want to spend time with them. What are some things that give you the sign, like the green flags that say that guy, like I'd like to invest in him?
Yeah, but this is difficult one. I also ask myself how can I, evaluate the founders? But my conclusion is that it's almost not possible to get the real conclusion within maybe a few hours of meetings. And always the best bet I like to do is that to get a reference calls, not necessarily not only the ones that are provided, but somehow to be able to check people, check with the people who worked with that individual or the group of individuals. That's what we like to rely on. And then, of course, there are certain type of people who I enjoy talking more than maybe others, and I think that that is important. And because, as you probably heard, that a lot of relationship between investors and the founders is often longer than marriage, so that it's quite important that you have some sort of chemistry to, because you're also going to go up and down and difficult times, and if you don't get along well, not just good times, but they'd be very tough to go through. But ultimately, I think I will probably still try to, yeah, get founders' reputation from other sources, and I try not to trust my gut too much on that one.
Awesome. Well, Tara, those are it for all the questions I've got. Is there anything that you'd like to add, or any lessons or insights that you'd like to talk about?
No, so yeah, my fund, EI, we often focus on Series A or B with ticket size 2 to 5 million. Um, but we do not lead outside Japan. Therefore, if you're one of the founders in this space and if you have questions, feel free to reach out. And guess you can find me on LinkedIn. And if there's relevant people I can direct you to, might be able to do that. Yeah, cannot promise that I'll be able to get back to everybody, but I'll try my best.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Tara.